Hello, tell us a bit who you are, your background, and your startup in 3 words.
Yeah, so my name's Brian. I come from the US, from Colorado. I just did my PhD at EPFL, working in Michael Gretzel's lab, working on perovskite solar cells. Through that research, I ended up doing a lot of data analysis. I developed my own software to help me with my data analysis. And that kind of grew into the startup now, where I'm taking that piece of software, making it useful for everybody else, and trying to commercialize it. The software is really about helping researchers automate their data management and analysis.
How did you have the idea of making it really a startup and spreading it?
So it all started kind of out of my own needs, just because I found it useful. It eventually got to a point where I was like, oh, just making this for everybody would be easy. It was a small step to go from my own personal software to making it usable for everybody. So I made that small step. I started showing it around the lab, got some good traction, got some good feedback, and just kind of developed it from there using the feedback of my colleagues, my collaborators who were also using it.
Maybe you could now tell us why is Thot special?
I would say our main competitor is Excel, Microsoft Excel, because the way that researchers work now is they collect their data into another Excel spreadsheet, get the results out of that template, copy that data into another one, combine it with all the other stuff. And it's just this manual process of copying and pasting data from spreadsheet to spreadsheet, which is slow. It's hard to manage up with like hundreds of spreadsheets, and it's error prone. What they do is drag and drop their data where they want, tell the program which analysis they want to run over the data, and then the data is automatically organized. You have kind of these basic level softwares like Excel or Origin Pro that don't really do any of the data organization. They just kind of do the basic data analysis. Or you have all the way on the other side what's called lab integration software, which is essentially if you're like a huge pharma company and you can spend $1 million creating custom software, you pay for a lab integration software. So we fit somewhere in between, more for the researcher side of stuff, but a bit more advanced than Excel or Origin.
So you're originally a researcher, but have you always had this entrepreneur mindset? If not, how did you switch from one to another? What are the specific aspects of your life that you had to change to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so when I was really young, I actually thought I was just going to do pure research. I came up in my bachelor's doing pure math. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do math and become a professor and be a mathematician. And then during my research for math, during my bachelor's thesis, I was like, oh, this is actually not what I want to do. So I switched to computer science and physics, did a little bit of stuff there. Still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I worked at a martial arts studio for about 3 years between my bachelor and master, kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. And during that time, I worked my way up through the company, starting as an instructor, and then moving on to the managerial team up into the CTO position. I was able to work with all the managers and owners at the company. And it was really through that I was like, oh, creating my own business would be super cool. So through that, I got that drive to start my own business. And then when I entered my master's, I entered with the goal of starting a business. The goal was to start a solar cell company, because that's the field that I did research in, and I wanted to help contribute towards the energy space. Came to EPFL to do my PhD for that as well. I wasn't able to hit those milestones, actually start a company in the solar cell space. At the same time that I was questioning, I developed the software. And so it was a pretty easy transition going from wanting to start a solar cell, but still in the space of science where I feel like I'm contributing to accelerating the pace of science. Working with the physical world is very difficult. Like you have to abide by the laws of physics. So especially what we were doing where we're really dealing with molecular systems. You're like, I want my system to do this, and then you try a bunch of stuff to make it do that, and it still just doesn't do it. How to make it do it is very difficult. So as you're going through the research process, if you're going into it with a business mindset, it's very difficult to continue in that mindset because there's no real way to force your results. Whereas with software, it's much easier to just say, oh, I want the software to do this, and then you just code it, and it does it. So there's a bit of a disconnect between doing this fundamental research and doing the business aspect of things.
You're in PhD, so you still have this somewhere in your long-term goals.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed my PhD. Like the fundamental research I was doing was very interesting, but I knew that being a researcher isn't something that I wanted to do as a career. Like I said, when I started my master's, it was like, okay, I want to start a business. That was really my main goal. And so I spent the next 2 years kind of, obviously my PhD was my main focus, but on the side I would develop the software and see if people would start using it. And I ended up getting some traction. I presented it at some summer schools and ended up having about 50 users throughout those 2 years get their hands on it, give feedback. So then when I went back to the TTO and the startup unit and said, here's the product, I'm finishing my PhD, I'd like to continue this to see if I can actually commercialize it. They asked again for those metrics of how many users do you have, what sort of traction, what sort of feedback have you been getting. I presented them with what I have, and then they funded me with the Ignition grant, which is what I'm on now.
Thank you. We have quite a precise question for you because many students hesitate between doing a master's degree in technology or doing a master's degree in something more related to management, entrepreneurship. Whom would you recommend to continue like master's degree in technology and science? Whom would you recommend to stop bachelor at EPFL, go into master's in management, entrepreneurship, technology?
So I actually faced a very similar question when I started my master's because I wanted to work in the solar space, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do the technology side of stuff or the management and policy side of stuff. I went to TU Delft for my master's, and they offered both of those sides of the solar space. I ended up going with the technology side and did my master's in electrical engineering because it just fit my interests more. The way that I kind of make decisions, I use everything as a litmus test. So if I find myself doing something naturally, I'll just kind of head towards that thing whenever it comes into a decision. So I was watching solar cell tech videos and physics videos just on my own because I was interested in it. But I never really got interested in like the law or the business management side of things. So when it came to that decision, I was already like, well, I do this on my own time for fun anyways, so I may as well go to school for that thing. And I think that's really what should be driving these decisions is you have to know yourself essentially and not try to force yourself into a position that you're not going to fit into. You don't want to be a square peg in a round hole. Go find the square hole also.
And understanding what you need from the university also, yeah?
Yeah, so one of the big things is Malcolm Gladwell, who's an author, talks about this. You want to put yourself into situations that are going to benefit you the most. Oftentimes when people are looking for a university for bachelor's or a PhD research group, they're going to go to the place that has the biggest name or the most notoriety or clout because, oh, I went to this lab or, oh, I got my degree from this university. Whereas it's often much better to really look at the place and say, do I fit in here? Is this thing going to provide me with what I need? So it might be better for one person to go to a smaller school where they can get more individualized attention rather than go to like Harvard or Stanford or Yale where you're just a little drop in a small bucket.
Okay, thank you. We have a final big question for you. You have been in the US, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands. You have talked to many researchers and people there probably, so you might have an idea of what will be in the future with technology, how will technology develop. What will be the main fields of where there will be the most innovations in the upcoming years? What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, the big announcement just in the last day was the nuclear fusion reaction coming out of the US for clean energy. So hopefully we see that still progressing. Obviously, there's lots of money in green tech, sustainable technology, all this sort of stuff. The data space, so all the AI, ML, statistics. I was actually just doing some research for a pitch I'm going to give. And the data broker space for AI data specifically, they project to grow 10x in the next 5 years. So from 10 billion to 100 billion by 2030, essentially. So it seems like all vectors are pointing that direction. So I think those are going to be the two big places we see technology going in the next decade, 15 years, something like this would be towards the green tech and then the AI ML.
Okay, 3 very short questions to finish up. One main human quality in an entrepreneur.
So I think it really just boils down to being an entrepreneur, being what you want to do. So there isn't one personality trait I can really give that makes a good entrepreneur, except that that's what you want to do. In general, I think that just working in business, science, whatever, empathy is going to be your biggest trait that really gets you along. So if you had to make me choose one, I would probably say empathy.
The main motivation for everything that you're doing?
I really want to see science become a much more transparent and open space. Right now, if you are at a small university, you don't have very many resources. There's a big disparity between, for instance, what we have at EPFL with our clean labs, our reactor, et cetera, compared to what maybe a university in South America in rural Argentina or something has. And that's one of the things that I want to do with the software is make it so these scientific projects are accessible to everybody without having the high friction of having to email a researcher, get their data, hoping that they say yes. You can just go on to essentially a GitHub-like website, click, I want this project, and then use it for your own purposes.
And finally, where do you see yourself and your company, your projects in 5 years? So
we have a pretty laid out roadmap. Obviously the timing with that is going to vary, but we have a desktop app coming out in 2023 that will launch first to our current users and then to the general public. Once we kind of work the bugs out in that, get it out to some people, we're going to start working on the web app, which is essentially going to be a GitHub-like site. And that will pretty much consume the rest of those 5 years. So it'll really be building these technologies that allow researchers to share their projects, do their data analysis more easily, comment on other people's projects, and hopefully make the scientific space a little bit more transparent, more accessible.
Thank you very much. We invite you to follow Brian's companies, and we wish you all the best in what you're doing.
Thanks so much, Victor. Really appreciate it, man.